In the movie, Julius Robert Oppenheimer quotes a short verse from the Bhagavad Gita, which the Hindu god Vishnu said, "Now, I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." This exact line is what scientist Oppenheimer said after the Trinity test on July 16 in 1945.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Why do I mention this verse from the Bhagavad Gita at the very beginning of this story? Did scientist Oppenheimer truly become a destroyer of worlds? He went to seek advice from scientist Einstein to check if his theory would work. He feared that if they made a mistake, it would trigger a massive chain reaction and destroy the entire world. But did that happen? Well, since I'm making this video right now, it obviously didn't. However, it is somewhat true, which the scientist Oppenheimer himself eventually accepted. But how? To find out, you'll have to watch the video until the end. So, without further ado, let's dive into the main plot of the story. The story begins in 1954 with a security hearing. We see that scientist Oppenheimer is being asked various questions. He is there to obtain his security clearance, which is necessary to access national security information and classified files. To get this clearance, one has to go through various questions and procedures. So, Oppenheimer is being questioned extensively about his loyalty to the country. Meanwhile, in the same year, Admiral Lewis Strauss is invited to a seminar where various questions are raised about Oppenheimer. It seems that Admiral Strauss has some issues with Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer is likely to be put on trial because of some links to communism found in his background. In other words, he is suspected of being a communist. For those who might not understand, let me reiterate, this period marks the very beginning of the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union are engaged in various forms of rivalry. The Soviet Union is entirely a communist regime. Therefore, Americans definitely do not like communists, and anti-communist sentiment is gradually increasing in America. They suspect that Oppenheimer might be a communist. Although the movie shows that the type of communism present in America at the time was different. But I won't go into those details, I am focusing solely on Oppenheimer. This movie frequently shows both the past and the present. So, we go further back in time and see how this scientist Oppenheimer begins his journey, how he becomes the father of the atomic bomb. The year was 1924, and at just 22 years old, Oppenheimer was working at Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge under physicist Patrick Blackett. However, he wasn't happy with his work. He was constantly plagued by severe homesickness and loneliness. He saw the world differently. Although he was heavily inspired by Einstein, Oppenheimer wanted to see another world within our world, the quantum world. Albert Einstein had opened the door to this quantum world, and now it is the responsibility of current scientists to explore it. At that time, opportunities in America were limited. There is no enthusiasm in quantum physics, and people do not even want to know about it. This is why Niels Bohr, whom Oppenheimer greatly admires, advises him to leave this place and go somewhere he can think freely. Following his advice, Oppenheimer went to the University of Göttingen in Germany. There, he completes his PhD and makes a new friend, Isidor Isaac Rabi. He also meets another famous physicist, Werner Heisenberg, who knows Oppenheimer because he recently published an article on molecules. Heisenberg suggests they could publish articles together. However, it's not possible, because Oppenheimer wants to return to his own country to make quantum physics popular there. Oppenheimer then starts teaching at Berkeley, where he meets another scientist, Ernest Lawrence, who is also a Nobel Prize winner. Oppenheimer is set to teach in the room next to Lawrence's, but he only has one student, whose name was Lamini. This is quite normal, as Oppenheimer is teaching a subject that the people of the country had never imagined before. Gradually, he starts to attract more students. Everything was going well, but one thing stood in the way of his success and reputation, and it was his ideology and views. Oppenheimer liked communism. He even sent much of his earnings to support the Spanish Revolution. At the same time, he attends a Communist Party gathering where the FBI is keeping an eye on him. These small things need to be noted because they are enough to destroy his entire reputation. Anyway, at that Communist Party gathering, he meets his brother Frank and his girlfriend Jackie. He also becomes friends with a man named Håkon Chevalier. Additionally, he meets another woman at the party, Jean Tatlock. They had a physical relationship, but Oppenheimer and his mind seemed to be in another world. Jean then took out a book from the bookshelf, which was entirely in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is the sacred language of Hinduism. She asked him to read a line from it, and Oppenheimer read the line I mentioned at the very beginning of the video.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
And at this time, in 1938, Oppenheimer received another shocking piece of news. Two German scientists, Otto Hahn and his assistant Fritz Strassmann, had discovered nuclear fission. They had split the nucleus of uranium. At first, Oppenheimer was shocked because he thought it isn't possible, but it had indeed happened. They had used neutrons to split an atom. As you know, uranium-235, which releases a significant amount of gamma rays when its nucleus is split, which is an excess energy. This energy can certainly be used to create a bomb. Since Germany had accomplished this, Hitler's power was at its peak at that moment. Already Hitler has occupied Poland. Oppenheimer is deeply concerned about this situation, especially since he is Jewish himself. Later, he joins another group, the FAECT, which was another wing of the communists. This raises further suspicions about his possible connections with communists. However, it is true that Oppenheimer was not a direct member of the Communist Party. He simply liked some of their ideologies. Later, Oppenheimer married Catherine, who was a former Communist Party member. Naturally, this added to the suspicion against him. Currently, he has a separate relationship with Jean, who is also a communist. This is why various accusations are being made against Oppenheimer. Admiral Strauss further fuels the fire, as he has a personal vendetta against Oppenheimer. Although Strauss is now the head of the Atomic Energy Commission, Oppenheimer had insulted Admiral Strauss at an meeting. Moreover, many years earlier, before their conflict, Strauss had invited Oppenheimer to join an institute where scientists could work with open minds. Einstein was also present there, whom Oppenheimer had known for a long time. After Oppenheimer's discussion with Einstein that day, Einstein quietly walked past Admiral Strauss without even looking at him. Admiral Strauss thought that perhaps Oppenheimer had spoken badly about him to Einstein. Since then, Admiral Strauss has harbored a kind of animosity and anger towards Oppenheimer. Additionally, the scientist Oppenheimer was somewhat arrogant and did not view everyone equally. At the beginning of the story, I mentioned that Oppenheimer did not see the world equally. He viewed it from a different perspective. This is also why, even after getting married, his marital relationship with Kitty was far from good. They had a child, but Oppenheimer could not devote any time to his family or even his child, leaving all the responsibilities to Kitty. Eventually, Oppenheimer goes to his friend Håkon Chevalier, and entrusts him with the care of his child so that he can look after the child for the time being. Now, it is 1942, and World War II is at its peak. Junior Leslie Groves has come to meet Oppenheimer. He wants to appoint Oppenheimer as the director of their Manhattan Project. So what is the Manhattan Project? Simply put, under the supervision of the US government, Oppenheimer will develop an atomic bomb. They need to complete this project before Hitler, who is several steps ahead. They have already split the uranium nucleus. However, Oppenheimer believes that they can defeat the Germans, especially in terms of this technology. The German scientist Werner Heisenberg has outstanding knowledge, but they won't be able to build the bomb quickly. But why? Because Hitler has told that quantum physics is a type of Jewish science, therefore, Hitler is not willing to invest much money in this technology. This means that scientist Werner Heisenberg will not be able to utilize all his research in time. And this provides an opportunity for America. So, they start working intensively. They build a mock village near Los Alamos where every scientist has come with their families. These scientists are those whom Oppenheimer has chosen and knows personally. This project will run for a long time, almost for years. Because of this, if they leave their families behind, they might not be able to focus fully on their work and give their complete attention to the project. Everything was going according to their plan. Meanwhile, Edward Teller presents a separate calculation. They think that according to Oppenheimer's theory, there might be a chain reaction that could destroy the entire atmosphere. This would mean that no life forms could survive. Oppenheimer later discusses this matter with Einstein, but Einstein does not offer any help. Einstein cannot support Oppenheimer's current work on building a bomb. Instead, he advises Oppenheimer to negotiate with the Nazis to ensure they do not build such bombs, at least to save the world. Later, it is proven that there were some errors in the calculations. The possibility of a chain reaction from the explosion is very low, almost close to zero. Therefore, they decide to take the chance. On the other hand, Edward Teller gives them another piece of advice, the hydrogen bomb, which you might be familiar with. To build the hydrogen bomb, they first need to create a smaller fission bomb, which is what they are currently working on. As a result, they do not pay much attention to Teller's suggestion. As time goes on, America falls significantly behind because, by then, the Soviet Union has likely conducted its first bomb test. They suspect it might be a hydrogen bomb, but they also wonder how the Soviet Union achieved this. Perhaps a spy sent their secret files to the Soviet Union. Now, various accusations are being directed at Oppenheimer. As we know, Oppenheimer had a preference for communism, and many scientists working on the Manhattan Project were members of the Communist Party. They are now being suspected of possibly sending their research's secret files to the Soviet Union. After all, the Soviet Union has taken a step forward. Now what should they do? Oppenheimer suggests negotiating a treaty with the Soviet Union. However, Admiral Strauss and many others present do not want any association with communists or any agreements with them. They literally despise communists. This creates another conflict between Admiral Strauss and Oppenheimer. Suspicions about Oppenheimer gradually intensify because both his ex-girlfriend and his current wife were communists. General Pace, who has a strong dislike for communists and is known for his harsh interrogation techniques, speaks with Oppenheimer. However, Junior Leslie Groves, who has been assisting Oppenheimer from the beginning, who was in charge of the entire Manhattan Project, personally arranges for General Pace to be transferred to another place to prevent him from harassing Oppenheimer. If you have seen this movie, you might notice that the scenes are sometimes shown in the present and sometimes in the past. In this video, I am explaining them in a linear way to make it easier for you to understand. Meanwhile, Oppenheimer and his scientists are working diligently. Following Oppenheimer's suggestion, scientist Niels Bohr, by whom Oppenheimer had inspired, is brought in to help. However, Bohr refuses to assist Oppenheimer, citing that the work he is doing will give birth to a new world. Bohr refers to Oppenheimer as the American Prometheus. According to the old mythology, Prometheus gifted fire to humanity, allowing them to understand its power. Just as Prometheus revealed the power of fire to humans, Oppenheimer is about to give America a new form of power. But now the question is the future generation ready for it? Actually, Oppenheimer initiated the project solely to stop Hitler. That was his only purpose. However, Hitler is dead now, but that specific war still hasn't ended. In that place, Japan's aggression was gradually increasing. And it was only for that reason that scientist Oppenheimer continued the project. Oppenheimer was working on this project to prevent the war. He aimed to scare the enemy into submission, hoping that everyone would back down. However, Leo anticipated that America would drop a bomb on Japan and was working on a petition, known in history as the Feedback Petition. According to this petition, they would issue a warning to Japan to surrender. If Japan did not surrender, only then would America drop the bomb. However, the petition was never completed. Oppenheimer himself did not sign it. And because of this, in the future accusations came against Oppenheimer that he knew everything and he himself wanted that bomb to be dropped on Japan. Anyway, regardless of the petition, the situation unfolded as anticipated. They had anticipated that Japan would not surrender. They had already shortlisted around 11 cities where the bomb could potentially be dropped. As you know from history, the bomb was dropped on 2 specific locations. Oppenheimer's project was almost complete, and now it was time for testing. The time was 1945, the Trinity test was a complete success. They realized just how devastating a nuclear bomb could be. At that moment, Oppenheimer uttered the words, "Now, I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Now the bomb is ready. Oppenheimer's role is now over. The soldiers would handle everything. 2 bombs are being transported to their targets, and you also know where the 2 bombs will be dropped. What happened next is what we had read in history books. Japan surrendered, and the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were completely destroyed. While people were applauding him and offering congratulations, he envisioned the suffering of the people in those cities, who are dying from the heat wave, shock wave, explosion and radiation, the countless deaths. Despite the accolades from everyone, including President Truman, and his front-page appearance in Time magazine, Oppenheimer was haunted by the reality of the destruction his work had caused. Oppenheimer felt deeply that his hands were stained with blood. His personal anguish was profound, others find it ironic. Admiral Strauss seizes this opportunity to try and undermine Oppenheimer, as Oppenheimer is deeply broken and is acknowledging his mistakes in every area. However, his wife motivates him, reminding him that he cannot break down like this. Kitty knows that Admiral Strauss is doing all this out of his resentment towards Oppenheimer, but there is no one to blame him. He hires William Borden, who is given approval for all of Oppenheimer's secret files. Scientist Oppenheimer's name is coming up from everywhere. Almost everything is going against Oppenheimer. However, Oppenheimer did not betray the country, but who will prove that? Well, David Hill. Although he was initially hard to understand, later he spoke against Admiral Strauss at that Senate hearing. If you've seen this movie, you'll notice 2 hearings. One is the security hearing, where Oppenheimer is seated and asked various questions by a lawyer named Roger Robb. However, this was not authorized. Admiral Strauss orchestrated the entire thing. He had gathered information in various ways to frame Oppenheimer. At the same time, Admiral Strauss is so greedy for power that he wants to see himself in a senatorial position. But his dream is not fulfilled. Because, a division of scientists, meaning scientists from across the country, are supporting Oppenheimer, which makes Oppenheimer's position gradually stronger. Along with that, David Hill also reveals the truth that Admiral Lewis Strauss was envious of Oppenheimer. And indeed, it's true. Admiral Strauss himself admitted why Einstein didn't speak to him that day. Perhaps Oppenheimer had said something against Strauss to Einstein, but does Oppenheimer really have time to speak ill of others? Moreover, Admiral Strauss, who absolutely dislikes communists, finds himself in a position where Oppenheimer is suggesting an arms agreement with the communists. For those who are a bit confused, let me clarify. During World War II, both America and the Soviet Union stood against Hitler. So, in that context, America and the Soviet Union were considered allied nations, although that didn't last. And that was the purpose behind Oppenheimer's advice. But Admiral Strauss had seen this suggestion negatively. Admiral Lewis Strauss, who was a mere shoe salesman, wanted to become the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission and was also eyeing a senatorial position. I hope you understand the extent of his greed. However, no one could defeat Oppenheimer. The truth was revealed. His own wife Kitty helped him a lot. Kitty was a former communist who genuinely liked communism but abandoned it over time. She did what was best for her country and her husband. Eventually, everything became fine. Oppenheimer regained his former honor and was awarded the Enrico Fermi Award in 1963. Einstein had told him that these people would use you, and once you was no longer useful, they would forget you. This was that day, the moment when Einstein left without even looking at Admiral Lewis Strauss. Earlier, Oppenheimer had come to Einstein with a question about whether the formula they had developed could lead to a chain reaction. It was later found that no chain reaction had occurred, and the atmosphere was not destroyed. However, now Oppenheimer realizes that he was wrong. In their nuclear tests, a chain reaction must indeed occur, leading to the complete destruction of the world. And this is true. America has passed the nuclear race, and then one country after another has joined in. You all know how many countries possess nuclear weapons, and if a third world war breaks out, everyone will use their full arsenal. Eden Borden, a pilot, was returning in his plane when he saw the V-2 rocket heading towards England from the sky. He imagines what would happen if that rocket contained a nuclear warhead and if more rockets were to pass through the sky. And scientist Oppenheimer is thinking exactly this. We often refer to him as the father of the atomic bomb in history books. However, the quote from Lord Vishnu that I mentioned at the beginning perfectly aligns with Oppenheimer. Well, that was the explanation of the Oppenheimer movie. There's much more to discuss about this film. There are many small political details and agendas used in the movie that I haven't covered, because they would go over many people's heads. But I hope you understand the basic plot. If you liked the video, you can like it and subscribe to my channel. So, see you again in the next video. Till then, take care and stay safe. Goodbye for today.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.